HAR.com was already a valuable tool, but once we were able to establish a relationship with our realtor, we had access to premium features that allowed us to feel much more educated. He brought tremendous experience, deep knowledge. I don't think we could have gotten through it without him.
Good morning, Texas Realtors. What an incredible morning it is. You guys are bringing the energy, the passion, and the commitment.
You are the strongest grassroots advocacy force in the state of Texas. You are the voice for Texas real estate. And when we stand together, we make a big impact.
We were able to sit down and talk about the issues that we are prioritizing this legislation, some of them being housing affordability, private property tax, transparency, and water infrastructure. We were able to discuss issues that they were concerned about as well.
We are here today at the Capitol for Realtor Day at the Capitol. We show up, we have meetings all day with Texas legislators, and we really have great conversations about the issues and the legislative topics that are important to us for home ownership, for property owners' rights, and this is the day where the rubber meets the road for realtors.
I invest in TreePack because it's the right thing to do. I invest in my clients, I invest in our industry, and if I didn't, it would be sticking my head in the sand and waiting for someone else to do what I need to do. If we're not at the table with the politicians, we're on the menu.
What I really like about this global dinners that we donate to TreePack is that we have a chance to learn about other cultures. With Houston being such a diverse market with all these other cultures, why not know more about the people that we serve, helping you find homes, that they're getting together, having a meal together, and learning about it. So I'm really excited that these global dinners come, giving us the experience to know where other people come from to better serve them, and at the same time, donating to a great cause in TreePack.
Being a first-time home buyer, I wanted to make sure that I was able to get into a home that would not stress me out. Through HAR.com, my realtor found me some down payment assistance, and that made it a lot more affordable to purchase a home.
Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Christina Schaefer, Director of Social Media and Sponsorships for HAR, and I'm pleased to be joined this morning during Go Time, as you'll hear today, by Eric Berger of Space City Weather. Welcome back to the program, Eric.
Thanks, Christina. Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know, as I mentioned, it's go time. It's a busy time for hurricane season, and you know we're all wondering what to expect, and that's why we have you here today. I'm glad you're able to join us again. Actually, the last time you were on this program was the week after Beryl, so that was a very busy time as well. But Eric, for anyone who doesn't know you or isn't familiar with Space City Weather somehow, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I've lived in Houston for more than a quarter of a century. Started writing about weather and hurricanes at the Houston Chronicle, starting with Tropical Storm Allison back in 2001. Which was a memorable event for those of us who were here. I left the Chronicle in 2015 to write about space for another publication, but I started a weather website called Space City Weather. I am a certified meteorologist, and Space City Weather has become the place where a lot of Houstonians get their daily weather information now. It's entirely online. We have an app, And we have a philosophy of no hype, where we tell people what we think they ought to know, and nothing really extraneous that they don't need to know. And we try not to get people too worked up, except in the cases when there's very serious weather at hand. That way we're not, crying wolf. We're telling people when they really need to be prepared for severe weather.
Absolutely. And I know so many people, I mean, just in my life and my personal life and our realtor members that follow very closely whenever, especially this time of year, but follow very closely year round, just to get your perspective, because that no hype is something I think we all kind of crave. It can get a little scary sometimes. So we appreciate that and the work you do. So what is the current outlook for the 2025 hurricane season, and how does it compare to previous years?
So the outlook for hurricane season is that we're likely to see fairly normal, if not a little bit above normal activity for the remainder of the season. We really kicked things off in a big way this weekend with Hurricane Erin. It became the season's first hurricane on Friday, and then 24 hours later it was a Category 5 hurricane in the open Atlantic Ocean, and that suggests that conditions out there are really at the point now where things are extremely favorable for intensification. So you get these classic hurricanes that form basically in what's called the main development region coming off of Africa. You see this from about mid-September to mid-October, where you get these powerful cyclones that come across the Atlantic and intensify and so forth. So Erin was really the first of those this season, and we expect to see more of them in the coming weeks.
So what weather patterns or different climate factors are shaping this year's forecast?
So a couple of big picture things. First of all, we are really in a neutral situation with El Niños. There's not a strong La Niña signal that can really tend to goose activity, and there's no real strong El Niño which can suppress activity with higher wind shear. So that's one factor that's pointing toward a normal season. Sea surface temperatures are above normal, but not extremely above like we've seen the past couple of years. Mm-hmm. That's led to a forecast of near normal to slightly above normal activity. But really, we're now at the point of the season, the heart of the season, where seasonal forecasts take a backseat. We're kind of just looking at what's actually happening now and kind of over the next couple of weeks.
So are there specific time frames in the season that pose a higher risk for the Houston area specifically?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, like from about August 10th to October 10th is the busiest time for the Atlantic in terms of overall activity, and that's the time of year when you expect the most powerful hurricanes to form. Texas is a little bit different. We also sort of see a serious uptick of activity, in the first 10 days or so of August through September. But by the end of September, for us here on the western Gulf Coast, the pattern starts to shift. And so the odds of a hurricane tracking across the Gulf and hitting Texas are lower. They're either sort of pushed down to Mexico or kind of recurve before reaching Texas. This is due to the jet stream kind of migrating further south as fall comes into the picture and we start seeing more fronts that steer storms away. And so, there's a date that I've found years ago, which I think is pretty valuable, is September 24th. And that's the date after which the odds of a hurricane striking Texas are not zero, but they're quite a bit lower. And so we've got 5 to 6 weeks really where we need to pay very close attention to the tropics.
Very good. And I think we'll all mark our calendars for that date. I'm just taking a look at the live comments coming in. No questions so far, but just wanted to share. Becky said, "Good morning, Eric's the real deal," and that's exactly why we call upon you to have you on our program and tell us the real deal. If you have questions for Eric, please type those in, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Eric, of course, this time of year, hurricanes take, that's what makes the headlines, right? But what kind of storms or impacts should local residents and realtors really be most aware of? Is it hurricanes, or is there more we should be paying attention to?
Well, August is, for me, the worst month of the year to be in Houston, because there's almost no good weather. You're either in a scorching drought, like with 100-degree weather temperatures, or facing down the prospect of a hurricane. And in August is a month where you can go from drought to flood in about an hour or less, with the kinds of storms we get. But I must say that the pattern for the next 10 days for for the rest of the month, and I'm knock on wood here, doesn't look that bad. We're going to see, daily shower chances, which are going to probably keep a lid on temperatures. So today's going to be pretty hot, but the rest of the week and next week looks like low to mid 90s, and enough rain to keep the trees and grass pretty green. So not too bad. As we get deeper into fall, the threat of hurricanes lessens, but then you start to get fall storm season, like you have spring storm season, where you get fronts coming down, bringing lots of energy. You get the clash of sort of this hot air mass in the Gulf and the colder air mass coming down from the north, and so that's when you can develop pretty severe thunderstorms. So we'll switch into that mode probably in 6 or 8 weeks. Actually, fall's the best time of year in Houston, I think. So you got to take a little bit of those storms with the good weather that they bring. But yeah, August is survive and advance month for me, because just the weather options are not great, and the best you can kind of hope for is low 90s with some daily showers.
Okay. So you mentioned the next 5-ish weeks. That's really the time that we need to be paying attention. How much advance notice do we typically have before a major storm makes landfall in our area?
It can vary significantly. You can get a storm like Hurricane Ike. This was a Category 2 hurricane back in 2008 that caused significant storm surge. I wrote about Hurricane Ike in advance for 12 days. So you could see that something was coming to the Gulf, and 5 or 6 days out, it was pretty clear it was likely to come to Texas. So that's one extreme, and then the other extreme, you get a storm like Hurricane Umberto, which came pretty quickly after Ike, and it formed just offshore Galveston and moved inland to High Island within less than 24 hours as a hurricane. So you kind of get the extremes. For most storms, we're going to have probably 3 to 5 days of advance notice. Now, the challenge is, you really need to be making final plans in that time frame. And so, we don't have, forecasts have gotten a lot better, but you still, an error of 80 or 100 miles in terms of landfall location makes a huge difference. If you remember, you may not remember back, can't read it, you're not as old as me, but it was 2005. Hurricane Reed at one point was forecast to come ashore in the Houston area as a Category 3 hurricane. Prompted this horrendous evacuation. And then, of course, within the last 24 hours, the storm turned and went in basically at the border between Texas and Louisiana. And so Houston's also minor impacts. We'll typically have time, but you're often in a situation where you're kind of hedging your bets because you're preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And, realtors specifically, they have their own homes and families and things to think about, but they also are working with people that are buying and selling every day of the year, no matter if it's hurricane season or not, right? So what are some advice, I guess, for realtors? What should they do immediately when a storm is projected to impact our area?
So the first thing I would do, and so it's interesting as a meteorologist too, when there's weather threatening, I have to worry about my house and my family and extended family as well as sort of working pretty constantly on hurricane forecasting. But my advice would be to really understand the threats and help educate people about that, because every hurricane is different, right? Hurricane Harvey was a very powerful hurricane, but it made landfall 150 miles south of Houston, so we didn't see any real wind and surge or much surge from Harvey, but that was an inland rainfall event. Hurricane Beryl was actually a weaker storm, but it made landfall further north. It was fast moving, and so that was more of a wind storm. And Hurricane Ike brought some wind, but that was really a storm surge storm. So really, one of the most important things is to understand your threats. And so if you're selling a house in Katy, Texas, and it's a Hurricane Ike type storm that's producing a significant storm surge, well, Katy is not vulnerable to storm surge. If you're selling a home in Galveston, right, that obviously is a hugely different impact for storm surge, especially for homes not protected by the seawall. But for an inland rainfall event, that's much less impactful in a place like Galveston. Now, certainly Galveston gets flooding rainfall, but if Galveston gets 15 inches of rain, that rain, essentially just goes into the Gulf of Mexico or the Galveston Bay, and so that that's not going to cause a significant flooding as opposed to 15 or 20 inches in Alvin or in Pearland or somewhere like that where you have to get to a bayou to drain. So it's really, as a realtor, I'd want to understand vulnerabilities and timeframes of impacts and then communicate that to buyers.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple comments. Peggy said, so important to prepare those seller properties. Brenda said, that's good. Understand your threats. Right info gives the right response. And I think again, with the no hype weather that you forecast and that you share with us, I think that's exactly what it is. You're telling us usually what to expect depending on where you are. So we definitely appreciate that. Actually, a question came in from Kevin. He was asking, what are your lessons learned from the tragic July 4th flash flooding? What's the implication for us here in the Houston area?
Yeah, so, I think that there were a couple of causes of the really catastrophic impacts of the July 4th flooding. And one of them was the timing, right? This really came in right before the holiday, and certainly on the night before the holiday weekend began. And so people were not paying as much attention to the weather, and they were enjoying their families and celebrating and so forth. So, and then I think too, like the media environment in Kerrville is much different than Houston, Texas. Like if that event had been in Waller County, we would have been all over it. Like Space City weather would have been all over it. Even though Waller County is fairly, in terms of population and in terms of location, is kind of on the edge of the Houston metro area. We still sort of consider Waller County, Montgomery County, all those areas sort of part of our metro area. And so like we would have been shouting from the rooftops that, hey, this very significant flood event is coming. Low-lying areas need to evacuate, and this is something that really needs to be taken seriously. Kerrville is kind of outside of that, right? It's far enough from San Antonio, it's far enough from Austin that it sort of escaped that attention, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think there were several factors beyond sort of the lack of warning system. And other, what the county officials did and did not do, that just would make that different if it were to happen.
Yeah, we're very lucky to have resources like Space City Weather and of course our local news stations that would be, like you said, on top of it. So absolutely, definitely agree with you on that. So going back to just advice to give clients, one question I have for you: what reminders should agents give their clients about flood zones, disclosures, and even insurance coverage during hurricane season?
Well, it's interesting, right? You're in the business of selling homes, and I consider flooding to be kind of an existential risk for the city of Houston, for the region, right? Certainly after Hurricane Harvey, so many people were impacted by that devastating event. But we'd had serious flooding before that. And, as someone who's written about the weather and forecasted for a quarter of a century in Houston, I've written about a lot of floods. So I know that more will come. And so I think that the transparency and honesty with buyers is important. And so helping them understand what flood zones are, what the differences are between X and AE and the different flood zones and their relative risk of properties, and helping them understand where their properties are. And I think as a realtor, you actually would engender trust with a buyer if you told them, well, this property is in a 500-year floodplain, this is in a 100-year floodplain. As you make your decision, that's something you want to consider. I think that would actually, as I say, build trust. And I'm sure, like as a realtor, you might be, afraid that a buyer is going to be scared off, right, by a property in a floodplain. But I think that more information in that regard is better, because then buyers are making a better informed choice And look, they can look this stuff up as well, right? And I think a lot of buyers coming to Houston are going to have questions and concerns about flooding. So I think the best thing realtors can do is be informed about the areas they're selling properties in, and educating buyers, because there are, if you look at floodplain maps, like you across the street could be a different flood zone, right? Depending on your proximity to a bayou or a creek. So, there are plenty of properties that are outside of flood zones. And then, you also want to be sure that you tell people to buy flood insurance, because the reality is that still is subsidized by the federal government, and is a relative bargain. So you're getting a lot more value for flood insurance in terms of peace of mind and in terms of protecting your property than you're paying in.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a question, or I guess clarification. Eric is asking about are they Flood X versus 500? Are those both low risk? Would you consider, some people say anywhere in Houston can flood, right? No matter what the flood zone is. So would you consider those low risk, or is there still something there that you should be advising your clients on?
I would say that yes, anywhere in the greater Houston region is susceptible to flooding. The reality is that we get tropical rainfall here, and it just can come so fast, so quickly, that almost any location, save for the top of hills or ridge lines, which are fairly few and far between outside of maybe like the Houston Heights in this area. So I would not say any area is like low risk. Certainly a 500-year floodplain is lower risk than a 100-year floodplain, but that doesn't mean that someone is not potentially going to flood or should not buy flood insurance. It's just, it's all relative. And I think that, there are no absolutes or black and whites when it comes to flooding. And also, those flood maps are not perfect, right? We've seen, the whole debate about, 100-year, 1,000-year floods, those kind of things. And like you get 3,000-year floods in 10 years, and you're like, well, were those really 1,000-year floods? So I think just helping people understand is that risk is relative. If you're in a 500-year floodplain, you're less likely to flood than a 100-year floodplain. Doesn't mean you won't. And it does mean your flood insurance rates will be lower. And so take advantage of that and purchase that flood insurance.
Very good. Thank you so much. Question here. So going back to preparing your clients, how should we advise our sellers with active listings to better prepare and protect their property from loss or damage?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, because sort of property management, it's not really outside of my expertise, but I would think that, sellers would want to take the same kind of precautions that what homeowners would take, right? Tie down loose items that might fly around. I would wait to put up protective hurricane coverings until 2 to 3 days before landfall, because you really only need those in certain circumstances. And most of the time storms won't get close enough to require plywood over windows, and obviously that leaves marks on homes. So I would just treat it like a homeowner would in terms of protecting their property, because the same things you want to protect from are the same things I, as someone who lives in a home and is very happy here, wants to protect from.
Very good. Thank you. Another question that I want to, let's talk about some myths and misunderstandings, because I think we have a lot of those, and I think anybody who follows active accounts like Space City Weather online, you see a lot of back and forth in the comments. So what are some of the biggest myths or misunderstandings that you hear about hurricanes, or even just preparedness in general?
I think the biggest problem we run into is that people share individual model runs that show a large hurricane hitting Texas. So I'll give you an example. This weekend, I think it was Sunday morning, there was a run of the GFS model. It's the main United States forecast model. It does good, but like on day 14 of one of its run, it had a major hurricane hitting Houston, Texas. And you might say, "Oh no, that's terrible." And the reality is that, an individual model run like that, more than 10 days out. So I mean, like the forecast running is, so it would be like for August 29th or whatever, is meaningless, is almost meaningless. There's almost no value in that. So if someone is sharing a run of like day 14 of the GFS model, the intention is not to inform you, it's to scare you or to provoke some kind of reaction, to get attention. It's irresponsible. That same model today, by the way, 24 hours later, is now showing the storm recurving into the Atlantic Ocean, right? So it was that the information that showed like a major Gulf hurricane, at the end of August, was meaningless. And so there's just a lot of that, particularly on social media, of sort of irresponsible sharing, and we've seen it. Like, people for days were like looking at Hurricane Aaron and dooming about the potential for that to hit Florida. And now they moved on to this next system, which hasn't formed yet, doesn't have a name, doesn't even have an area of investigation associated with it yet, and sort of starting to hype that up. And so I would just tell people to be very wary of that kind of information out there that's not really credible, and is intended really to upset or provoke rather than inform. And then there's all kinds of myths with hurricanes. One of my favorites is that well, there's a hurricane in the Gulf, and what can we do to stop it? And what's the most powerful weapon we have? It's an atomic bomb. So let's nuke a hurricane to disrupt it. And that turns out to be a terrible idea, because the amount of energy in a tropical cyclone is actually far greater than a nuclear weapon. And so it would absorb that, and it would just become very efficient at spreading radiation. So we don't want to nuke hurricanes.
It seems far-fetched, but again, the things that you see online sometimes. So Mary was asking, and I think this is a great question, what are the prevailing long-term climate trends and potential impacts on this area? So long-term, what are you seeing impacting us?
So we've already seen it with nighttime temperatures. You may have experienced this summer and thought that, wow, this was as Houston summer goes, it was pretty nice, right? We've only had a couple 100-degree days. There's been enough rainfall to kind of keep a lid on temperatures. And daytime highs have been pretty normal, and which is a nice contrast to the last couple of summers. But the nights actually have been extremely hot. So we haven't really seen cool downs. So if you look at average temperature, this summer is like the 7th hottest summer on record in the city of Houston. And it doesn't feel like it, because if as I said, the daytime temperatures have been relatively normal. So we're already seeing, from a climate perspective, temperatures going up, particularly at night. And that's because the Gulf is warmer and so forth. And so like places like Galveston are setting all kinds of records. In terms of sea level rise, it does make us more vulnerable to storm surge. There's no question about that. And then there is some evidence that higher precipitation events are occurring more frequently. And so, an event like Harvey is still extremely rare, but it becomes a little bit more likely in a warmer world. And then with Aaron, and Beryl last year as well, when it was in the Caribbean, we saw this really extremely rapid intensification. Aaron actually set a record for a pre-September 1st storm in terms of how quickly, it intensified in a 24-hour period. So, we're seeing probably the stronger storms get stronger more quickly. Counterbalancing that a little bit is that we don't expect to see more hurricanes and tropical storms in a warmer world. They're probably going to be a little bit more intense. So the trend lines are not great for a place like Houston, which is already pretty hot and living on the coast. But, there are things we can do, like as a community, to manage it. And like I said earlier, I think flooding is a very serious problem for our region. And so we need to be doing more to manage flooding. I just don't think we've taken. I was actually having a conversation with the former county judge, Ed Emmett, a couple of weeks ago about this. We just have not taken, as a community, major steps after Hurricane Harvey to really mitigate against flooding. And so it comes back to realtors, to home buyers, to better understand the vulnerabilities of their properties that they're buying, and make sure they're buying in areas they're comfortable living in.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I wanted to share, somebody had a comment, Kevin had a comment about knowyourwatershed.com as a great resource that they share with buyers. Besides Space City Weather, Eric, what resources do you recommend for people?
So the National Hurricane Center is outstanding. They're based in Miami, but they provide forecasts across the Atlantic Basin, 5-day forecasts for hurricanes, 7-day outlooks, all kinds of information about storm surge, wind probabilities, wind onset. Just that is by far the most useful resource anyone can have and point to for hurricane information. And then in terms of local impacts, the Houston Galveston office of the National Weather Service has a great website. And they put out very good information as well. So in this case, I would say that the federal government is working very well for you. I don't see any hype in the products of the National Hurricane Center. They did do a great job. So I would say that you should really trust the government forecasters. I know them. They're doing their best to put out credible information, and they're more right than they are wrong.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for that. And for anyone who's not already following Space City Weather or getting your updates, tell us all the resources. Tell us about the website, the app, social media, anywhere that we need to be following.
Yeah, so spacecityweather.com. We turned 10 years old in October. So you can go to the website. You can sign up for email alerts. Several years ago, we introduced a free app for iPhone and Android devices, and you can get notifications anytime we do an update through that, and all the information is there. And so the app is a great way from a lot of people to also access the site. We're on social media as well. You can search us on all the various platforms if you're interested in finding us that way.
Very good. Well, Eric, this has been wonderful. We have a lot of people thanking you in the comments and just saying, yes, know your risk, and just really agreeing with the things that you're sharing here today. So we really appreciate that. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience this morning?
The most important thing I want to share is that fall is not too far away. We're almost there. We've almost made it through another summer. I think we're about a month away from having, a real hope for some real fall fronts for the first time. So, the next 4 to 6 weeks, really important time to watch the tropics, but then we get into the best time of year in Houston, which is fall and heading in toward cooler temperatures.
Absolutely. Looking forward to some fall patio weather very soon. Well, Eric, again, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. If you're not already following Space City Weather, we've shared their website in the comments. You can go and sign up for those emails from them, download their app, follow them on all the places on social media to stay up to date, especially over these next 5 or 6 weeks, as Eric said. So Eric, again, thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, that's it for this Member Focus Monday. We will be back next Monday at 9 a.m. with HAR's MLS Project Manager, Nathan Goebel. He's going to tell you about all of the updates that have taken place in Matrix MLS and what to expect. Some updates coming soon as well. So be sure to tune in for that one. Again, Eric, thank you for your time today, and have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.